Hatred, anger, rage. Anakin Bonteri couldn't escape these emotions while meditating aboard the Rogue Shadow. Though his mother Ahsoka had reached out to him time and again, he always pushed her away. She didn't understand what he was going through, and how could she? The young Togruta had survived a torturous ordeal. He suffered indignities which would break most. The fact he was still sane was a feat in and of itself. Despite her desire to do otherwise, Ahsoka would give her son the space he needed, and hoped someone other than herself could break through to him. Smiling faintly, Galen stepped out of his quarters and adjusted the belt of his robes. Using back channels, Juno had managed to send the young Jedi a message he thoroughly enjoyed. Despite the pair's respective duties keeping them apart, their relationship had only grown stronger. Though it had only been a year since that fateful day on the Death Star, Galen could sense how much he's changed. In combat, he was focused. In times of peace, calm. It was as if the young Jedi had become a different person, as if he was living up to the potential Coda saw within him. The darkness which dominated most of his life was still very much present. However, it no longer held the sway it once had. Galen was no longer alone. There were people in his life he could rely on, people who understood him. He had found a strength, a reason beyond himself to fight, and he had grown. Sensing the twisted emotions emanating from the meditation chamber, the young Jedi understood there was another who needed to learn this lesson for himself. Still trying to meditate, Anakin focused his mind upon the spare lightsaber Galen had lent him, only to grow frustrated as it shook and rattled before him. Then, with the Force, the young Jedi snatched it away from the Togruta. "Hey, give that back," Anakin shouted, rising to his feet. Galen turned down the weapon's emitter output and expanded the containment field. "If you're going to sleep with it," the young Jedi began to explain, "you should learn how to use it." "I know how to use it," the Togruta venomously declared. With a toss, Galen gave the lightsaber back to Anakin before readying his own. "Show me." With those words uttered, the young Jedi activated his weapon's blue blade and adopted a fighting stance. Ziel called out, tucked away in the chamber's corner. "Should I leave?" Prior to the current confrontation, the young Quarren had been using the ship's workbench to tinker on Ahsoka's Shoto. If a duel was to break out, she'd almost certainly be in the way. "Stay," Galen instructed. "Block the door and don't let Ahsoka in." That comment piqued Anakin's attention, prompting him to adopt a fighting stance of his own. Okay, Ziel stammered while following her teacher's orders. With the door sealed and latched, a silence fell upon the room as the pair of lightsabers hummed softly. Then, taking initiative, Anakin lunges at Galen with a well-aimed thrust. Though the young Jedi is able to deflect it, the movement's technical skill catches him by surprise. Before Galen can counter, however, the Togruta places his hand upon his weapon's hilt and cuts upward, forcing the young Jedi to dart backwards. Trying to make herself as small as possible, Ziel watches the duel before her unfold from behind the workbench. Back and forth, the pair of combatants exchange a series of blows which don't connect and bounce off of one another. Galen was holding himself back, testing the waters to gauge the skill of his opponent, and Anakin hated that. "Come on!" the Togruta lashed out in anger. "Fight back already!" Then, with a single sideswipe, the young Jedi sears off a very small portion of Anakin's cheek, ushering in an abrupt pause to the fight. Shocked, the Togruta stares at Galen with a look of utter bewilderment. He expected the blades to be in training mode, and not whatever current state they were in. "They won't cut too deeply," Galen explained, "but they will cut." Once more, the young Jedi adopted a fighting stance. This time, however, Anakin did not follow suit. Instead, he stared at his assailant in unmoving silence. Undeterred, Galen swung his blade at the Togruta and cut into the boy's chest. Anakin believed the attack would be a bluff. He realized how grave his error was as he dropped to the floor. "Lost your will to fight," the young Jedi taunted. Feeling the anger well up inside him, Anakin forced himself to his feet and deactivated his weapon. "I'm done. I won't let you bait me," the Togruta declared, trying to keep a level head. "Bait you?" Galen scoffed. "I'm fixing to beat you." Ziel cowered behind the workbench. She had never seen her teacher this way before, and it scared her. Throughout the months they've spent training together, Galen had always treated the girl with a degree of tenderness and care. This, however, what he was doing with Anakin, was completely different. Again, the young Jedi cut into the Togruta, and again, the boy picked himself up after being knocked down. Over and over this repeated, the hatred within Anakin growing until the mounting darkness within her son caught Ahsoka's attention. Frantically, the former Jedi rushed over to the chamber and began pounding on the locked door, her demands to be let in falling upon deaf ears. "Fight me," Galen ordered. "No," Anakin barked, clutching his wounds. The young Jedi slashed again. "Fight me!" The Togruta remained silent and curled into a ball so he could protect his head. "Galen!" Ziel shouted, her head popping out from behind the workbench. "Galen, stop! You're hurting him!" "I will if he stops fighting himself and starts fighting me," the young Jedi loudly declared. The assault didn't let up as Galen continued to wail on Anakin. Though the Togruta's darker emotions were growing, the boy refused to give in to them. Much like he had at Prakith, Anakin buried every venomous thought, every twisted desire deep within him. He embraced apathy and lost himself within it. "It seems there's no getting through to you," Galen stated, switching his weapon back to its combat state. "I guess you're better off dead." Sensing his dangerous intent, Ziel grasped the hilt of Ahsoka's Shoto, leaped out from behind the workbench, and met her blade with that of her teacher's. "Galen!" Ziel screamed, terrified. "This isn't you!" For a moment, the tears running down his student's face made the young Jedi hesitate. He didn't want to hurt Ziel, but he had to break through to Anakin. Snapping back to his senses, Anakin awoke to a sight he couldn't quite grasp. Ziel, overpowered and on one knee, was before him with her arched back mere inches away from his face. She was desperately trying to keep Galen at bay, but was profoundly failing. Faintly, the Togruta could hear shouting from beyond the chamber's locked door. "Get up!" Ziel directed at Anakin, her arms about to give out. "Run!" With his offhand, Galen grabbed the Quarren by her wrists and lifted the girl into the air. Then, as if she weighed nothing, tossed her to the side. This time, the young Jedi wasn't gentle. When Ziel hit the floor, she hit it hard. As he watched the Quarren who defended him slam back first into the ground, Anakin felt something within him snap. In a blind fury, he reactivated his weapon and charged Galen with reckless abandon. His strikes had no technique, no finesse, no skill. He was reacting on emotional impulse and trying to achieve his only desire: cut the Jedi's head off. In his haze of seething hatred, however, the Togruta had two questions spring to mind. Why was he so angry that Ziel got hurt, and why did he feel betrayed by Galen? He hardly knew the pair, yet here he was, letting out a passionate display of emotion. Sensing the boy's unprotected thoughts, Galen pushed Anakin away with the Force and reverted his lightsaber back to a less dangerous state. Before the young Jedi could get his bearings, however, he lost his footing and went flying into the nearby wall. The culprit of this complication being Ziel, whose arm was outstretched before her at the opposite end of the chamber. "Stop," the girl uttered, exhausted yet rising to her feet. "Both of you." Feeling a calm aura radiate off of Ziel, Anakin tempered his emotions and dropped his weapon. He wasn't completely with it, but he was through with fighting. Galen, however, had propped himself up into a sitting position and was resting his back against the chamber's wall. "Anakin, there's nothing wrong with what you're feeling," the young Jedi began. "No matter how dark or twisted those emotions are, they are a part of you. Ignoring them isn't going to change that." Worn out, both of the kids dropped to the floor and took a seat. The entire exchange had been draining on various levels. They no longer had it in them to stand. From the chamber door, neither Ahsoka's banging nor her shouting could be heard. Much like the fight itself, it too had died down. "I know what you went through at Prakith," Galen continued. "For most of my life, I've lived it." The Togruta, weary-eyed and tired, looked to the young Jedi. He could sense that he was telling the truth, but he couldn't bring himself to believe it. "It's not easy. Coming back. Most people, they can't do it," Galen explained. "They confront parts of themselves they'd rather not face. It takes a strength most people just don't have. At least, not on their own." The young Jedi opens the chamber's door with the Force, revealing Ahsoka, before tapping on his chest. He then points to Ziel and makes his message clear to Anakin without saying a word. The boy wasn't alone. If you don't confront what happened to you, confront emotions you bury, you'll lose yourself. Galen goes silent for a time, realizing his own words apply to him as well. How can I do that? Anakin asked, finally breaking his silence. I wish I could tell you, but I'm still figuring that out myself, the young Jedi admitted. Though, I know one thing for certain. You'll find clarity being with those who understand you. Ahsoka's eyes widened as she realized Galen's unintended implication, an implication he himself was not aware of. We're closing in on Raxus, the former Jedi interjected. Let's get everyone patched up before we land. Judging by her tone of voice, Galen could tell Ahsoka had conflicting feelings about what just happened. She hated that her son got hurt and that she was kept out of the loop. However, Anakin felt less troubled. The young Jedi did something right, even if his methods were extreme. With the two Togruta gone, the Quarren girl mustered her strength and walked over to Galen. Before he could utter a single word, however, she punched him in the mouth and left the meditation chamber. Though she said nothing, the gesture made things quite clear. Ziel was furious. Clutching his jaw, Galen admitted, "Yeah, I deserve that one," before smiling to himself. His student had just made an unexpected breakthrough with the Force. He couldn't help but feel proud. When the Rogue Shadow finally dropped out of hyperspace, the ship's crew were greeted by a most unwelcome sight. The Imperial fleet orbiting Raxus had grown exponentially bigger and was blockading the world. To make matters worse, the sensors were picking up large-scale conflict on the planet's surface. Lux, Ahsoka uttered to herself. What have you done? Hitting a flashing light on the ship's communication console, Ziel opened a live transmission being broadcast over open channels from the Raxus Imperial Governor. All of you, end this pointless conflict and surrender peacefully, ordered a regal woman clad in red. If you continue as you are, then your lives and that of your families will be forfeit. The Empire is benevolent and merciful, but it will not tolerate such belligerent terrorism. Those aboard the Rogue Shadow shook their heads as they watched the broadcast's hollow projection. The governor's words had no sincerity behind them. The woman, standing stiff and straight, looked more like a puppet, an organic droid, than a person. This isn't a fight you can win, the governor continued. You'll be treated fairly if you lay down your weapons, but you must lay them down. Then, much to the surprise of those listening, an explosion rang out and brought the woman's address to a sudden halt. Please, continue. I've always been one for a bit of comedy. The voice of Lux cracked in the distance. With a blaster pointed at the governor, the rebel leader stepped into frame of the holoprojector, allowing his visage to be broadcast across the system. You were explaining how merciful and fair the Empire is, so go on, Lux quipped. Don't stop on my account. How dare you? The woman stammered. I swear, you'll pay for this. The rebel leader loosened his grip around the blaster and let it drop. With one finger still in the trigger guard, the weapon spun downward as he handed it to the Imperial Governor. There you have it. I've laid down my weapon, Lux stated bluntly. Now, will I be treated fairly by the Empire, or will I still have to pay for what I've done here? Shocked, the woman looked up at the rebel leader in stunned silence. She didn't know what to do. The blaster was in her hands, and yet she still didn't know what to do. Then, with anxiety and panic rising in her chest, the governor raised the weapon to Bontari's head and pulled the trigger. Though, much to her horror, nothing came out. The blaster's power cell was empty. Mercy and fairness. Lux raised his hand toward the outplayed governor. To the Empire, these ideas mean nothing. The rebel leader grabbed his blaster by its barrel and ripped it from his would-be assailant's hands, causing the woman to collapse out of fear. Then, with one mighty kick, Lux knocked down the governor's podium and outstretched his hands toward the holoprojector. People of Raxus, of the galaxy, open your ears and hear me. Hear the words fear has stopped you from speaking. Hear them and know that they are your own. Closing in on the planet, Ahsoka walked over to the ship's console and shook her head with a wry grin. Thanks to the old CIS shadow feed, Lux's resistance had temporarily hijacked several important HoloNet feeds. His address wasn't to just those of Raxus, but to the entire galaxy. There were principles, ideals, which we as a people, as a republic, as a confederacy, believed in so strongly, clung to so fiercely, we lost sight of our dream. The dream of the republic. Seeing his sensors flare up, Galen noticed that several warship-sized vessels were closing in on the system from all angles. Something was about to happen. The Empire we've all come to know is consumed and committed to our total subjugation. It strips us of our liberty, our freedom, yet it forgets it was these very ideals we fought a war born of misunderstanding to protect. By the virtue of its actions, the Empire demands to be fought. And fought it shall be. As those words left Bonteri's lips, the ships closing in on Raxus began dropping out of hyperspace. At first, it was only a handful of retrofitted civilian vessels. However, as time passed, a tidal wave of old separatist warships poured into the system. From munificence to providences, and recusants to Lucerholks, the Raxus resistance seemed less a rebel cell and more an armada. Where in the hell did he get all these? Galen asked, utterly bewildered. Not every holdout was defeated, explained Ahsoka. When the Jedi fell, a lot of things clicked with Lux. He set out to forge his own alliance and bide his time, wait for the right moment to set things right. I know the task before us is a great one, but I say to you, our true challenge does not stem from the Empire's might. Our true challenge is to do what must be done, learn from a past stained in blood, without undoing the dream of the Republic. From the Rogue Shadow's window, Ziel and Anakin watched as swarms of vulture droids clashed with Imperial TIE fighters in a dazzling display of color. Then, once in range, the grand fleets of two opposing forces opened up on one another. The display that followed, though rife with death, had a beauty to it the pair couldn't put to words. Like a graveyard full of flowers, the battle was vibrant, yet somber. I have but one fear, losing sight of what matters, becoming a monster like those who rule over us. So I vow to you, people of the galaxy, I will set things right. And though I fear what this great journey may have in store, I know one thing for certain. When compared to the promising future that lays before us, I do not fear the Galactic Empire. The rebel's speech came to an end as the transmission finally cut out. Taken aback, Galen stood up and nodded to himself. Your father is one hell of a man, the young Jedi directed at Anakin. The Togruta smiled faintly. Yeah, he is. Realizing what was about to happen, Ziel used the fleeting moment of calm to hand Ahsoka back her Shoto. However, much to the girl's surprise, the former Jedi waved her away. We're going into battle. You're going to need a weapon, stated Ahsoka, just in case. Taking the ship's controls, the former Jedi directed the vessel away from the space battle and toward the planet. Raxus has several planetary batteries, Ahsoka started to explain. They need to be captured or taken out, otherwise the fleet won't last long. Which one we heading to? Galen asked without hesitation. The one in the capital. It's heavily fortified and hosts a large garrison, the former Jedi elaborated. After breaking through the atmosphere, the Rogue Shadow was met by a world in chaos. Fighting had broken out all across Raxus, with resistance and Imperial forces laying into one another as night descended upon the planet. Unlike the battle in space, which was colorful and perhaps a bit beautiful, the ground war was vicious, dirty. The fighting in the capital was no exception, as it devolved into hand-to-hand combat, with an enraged civilian populace taking to the streets with improvised weapons. Closing in on its target, the rogue shadow maneuvered through the city's skyscrapers, trying to avoid Imperial TIE fighters. However, despite Ahsoka's best efforts, she couldn't get one particular craft off her tail. Then, with a few well-placed shots, the unique enemy TIE fighter pierced the ship's hull. With gravity taking them, both Ziel and Anakin slid out the opening at rapid speeds before Ahsoka could correct the vessel's orientation. As the pair fell, however, Anakin reacted quickly and grabbed Ziel by the arm as they soared through the sky. Having no time for doubt, the young Togruta unhooked his lightsaber, closed the distance on the persistent TIE, and plunged his blade into the ship's cockpit, causing it to crash on a neighboring roof. Seeing where they landed, Galen turned back to Ahsoka and shouted, "Complete the mission, I'll go after them," before jumping out of the rogue shadow, giving the former Jedi no time for debate. Dragging Ziel out of the wreckage, Anakin couldn't escape the sense that something was terribly wrong. With rain gently falling upon the war-torn city, the night sky twinkling as the battle in space waged, the young Togruta realized his notion wasn't unfounded. Then, from the crashed TIE fighter emerged a pale-skinned Morellian who was missing an arm. Knowing all too well who it was, Anakin reached for his lightsaber and activated its crimson blade. My, what do we have here? Barriss questioned maliciously. A young boy who needs to be taught a lesson, it seems. Standing up, Ziel activated Ahsoka's silver shoto and readied herself beside Anakin. "Get yourself out of here. I'll hold her off," the Togruta wearily barked. "I'm not leaving you." The girl's declaration was simple, yet firm. She wasn't going anywhere. The Inquisitor laughed sadistically and tossed the pair her haphazardly severed arm. During his rapid descent, the Togruta had unintentionally cut it off. "My dear Anakin," Barriss began, "if you wanted my hand, all you had to do was ask for it." The woman's comment froze the boy's blood as horrific memories flooded his mind. What she did to him, the things he can never get back. It was just too much. "Shut your stupid face!" Ziel shouted at the top of her lungs. "He isn't yours!" "Oh, but I'm afraid he is," the Inquisitor said with a coy smile. Remaining silent, Anakin began to tremble as Barriss drew closer. His thoughts weren't on the fight, they were somewhere else, entirely. Quickly switching the settings of its containment field, Ziel ran the Shoto's blade against Anakin's leg. Lurching back in pain, the boy shifted his attention away from the Inquisitor and toward the Quarren. "You can't fight her and yourself," Ziel shouted, mirroring Galen's words. Barriss stopped and watched the odd display before her. Anakin's inner turmoil delighted the Inquisitor immensely. However, the young girl's spirit caught her off guard. It was a faint thing, a spark, so to speak, but the warmth which emanated off of it was immense. Though Ziel's connection to the Force was weak, there was a life to it unlike anything the fallen Jedi had encountered. "Face what happened," the girl pleaded. "Face her!" Fed up, Barriss reached out with the Force and grabbed a hold of Ziel, locking her in place. "That's enough out of you," the Inquisitor venomously spit. With a few movements of her wrist, Barriss threw Ziel around and crashed the Quarren's body into whatever wreckage she could see. Despite her best attempts at putting on a brave face, there was only so much punishment a 10-year-old girl could take. She began to scream as the pain became too much to bear. "See, little girl," the Inquisitor taunted. "He's mine." Frozen in place, the trembling Togruta helplessly listened to Ziel's whimpers as Barriss continued to have her way with her. He couldn't bring himself to do anything, and he hated that fact far more than he hated the Inquisitor. Then, as the steady rains of Raxus became a downpour, Anakin began to hear something echo within the depths of his mind. "If you don't confront what happened to you, confront emotions you bury, you'll lose yourself." Steadying his breathing, the boy calmed his nerves and brought an end to his trembling. Realizing something was amiss, Barriss shifted her gleeful attention away from a brutally battered Ziel and toward Anakin. "Everything you're holding back, let it out." There was a rising power within the boy, a force begging to be unleashed. "Let it all out." His hands wrapped tightly around the hilt of his lightsaber, Anakin charged forward in one thunderous motion. Every ounce of the boy's hatred His rage, every instance of fear he felt, of anger, propelled him toward the Inquisitor he despised. With the strength of an unstoppable torrent of emotion behind him, Anakin clashed his blade against Barris's and sent both of them flying off the edge of the building. The sheer power and momentum from the attack was far too much for the one-armed Inquisitor to handle. Before she knew it, Barris found herself on a collision course with the war-torn streets of Raxus, while a boy she claimed as her own followed in hot pursuit, hell-bent on killing her. Several miles out, Galen could feel what had transpired between Anakin, Ziel, and Barris. In spite of that, however, he was in no position to help. The vast expanse of a war-torn city stood between him and the kids. Whatever fight was to come would undoubtedly be theirs, and theirs alone.